Let's go ahead and begin the process of binding our geometry to the joints themselves. So in the last clip, we finished off by creating all the joints that we need for this rig. Now we need to actually go in here and skin or bind the geometry to the joints so that if we move the joints, the geometry is going to follow along. So we're going to begin with the first joint we created for these lenses or eyes up here at the front of our drone. So basically what we want to happen is we want to be able to select this joint, and whenever we move this joint, we want these lenses or eye clusters to actually follow along. So to do that, let's actually go ahead and bring up the outliner. So we're going to go up here to Windows, Outliner, and we can actually go ahead and dock this along the left side. So we'll just click and drag until we see this highlight here, and we'll drop that in. And we want to actually go ahead and expand this drone group. This is where all of the geometry is going to be stored here. And we want to focus on the eye cluster L and the eye cluster right. So we're going to begin with the right group here. So in order to actually skin or bind our geometry, we first need to select the geometry that we want to skin or bind, and then select the joint. So we'll select this geometry here. And then we also want to shift select this cable piece because we want to actually bind that to this joint as well. So with that geometry selected, let's shift select this joint. We'll go up to Skin, Bind Skin. Let's open up the option box. We'll reset our settings to make sure we're both working at the same settings here. And we can keep everything at its default value, but we're going to go ahead and adjust this joint hierarchy to selected joints. That's basically saying that we are skinning or binding the geometry to the joint that we actually have selected. And then we'll go ahead and hit Bind Skin. And there we go. So now if we select the actual joint and begin moving this, you can see all of that geometry is following along with that joint, which is exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and repeat this process for the left side here. So we'll select that eye cluster left, shift select that cable piece, shift select the joint, go to Skin, Bind Skin, and there we go. And we'll do the same for this gun piece down here at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and select that gun geometry, shift select the joint, Skin, Bind Skin. All right, and then we'll come down here and do the same on this piece. Selecting the geometry first, shift selecting the joint, Skin, Bind Skin, and there we go. We can test this out. You can see that whenever we move that joint, the geometry is following along. Now we also want to go ahead and do this for this sensor piece. Now all we want to actually be able to control with this particular sensor joint are these pieces of geometry around the edge. And if we go in here and scroll down a little bit, you can see that in the actual drone group, we have this other group called the sensor miscellaneous. We can select that, and that's going to select all of these little individual pieces around the sensor. And this is actually the geometry we want to bind. So with that group selected, we'll shift select this joint. We'll go to Skin, Bind Skin. And now if we rotate this joint around, you can see those sensors are following along. All right. Now let's actually go ahead and move on to the plate pieces. So just like before, we want to select the geometry we want to bind first. So we'll select this piece right here. We'll shift select the joint, go to Skin, Bind Skin. And then if we rotate the joint, you can see that this entire piece is now following along. Now we also need to go ahead and bind this piece to this joint right here. So we'll go ahead and select that geometry, shift select the joint, go to Skin, Bind Skin, and there we go. So you can see that since this is the parent joint, we move this around, that joint is going to follow along. And if we want to, we can also rotate this joint independently to give us a little bit more manipulation on this bottom plate piece as well. We can go ahead and undo a couple times to go back to their default position. All right. So we've actually gone through the process of binding all of the pieces for the front of the drone here. Let's actually go ahead and just continue on in the next clip. And we'll begin the process of binding the actual repulsors to the joints that we've created. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next clip.